Welcome back, everyone. I am joined today by John Staats, a former WoW level designer, an author, and a board game maker. And he has a new book coming out soon related to the World of Warcraft. It's a developer diary of sorts. And John has been gracious enough to join us today to answer a lot of questions that I've built up and also to introduce a little bit about his book.
Hi, Supa. Thanks for having me. Hey, everyone. I've coming out with a Kickstarter campaign on August 28th for the World of Warcraft diary. It's a pretty comprehensive book on how we made World of Warcraft. And if you want to check out my webpage, it's whenitsready.com. But right now we're just talking about World of Warcraft, I think. Right, Supa?
That's exactly right. And I will have the link to whenitsready.com in the video description so everyone can check it out there. And John was also nice enough to get me a sample of the book, the first 80 or 90 pages. And in my opinion, it's a very interesting read. And I think a lot of people will enjoy it, whether you're a WoW fan or maybe an aspiring game designer. I think there's a lot of people, a large audience that might enjoy it. So, so far I've been excited to read it through it, and I'm looking forward to the rest of it.
Yeah, I wrote the book for even a non-gamer, so I explained the simple terms like FPS is first-person shooter, all the knucklehead stuff. But it gets. I kept most of the technical jargon out, but occasionally I have to explain what a game engine does. The types of geometry that a game engine uses. But yeah, that's all explained in the book, so it should be pretty easy for anyone to understand.
Yeah, I agree with that. It seemed to me not to be overly technical. I have no experience in software development or game development. I'm a big fan. I've been a video game fan my whole life, but that's as far as I got into the industry, and it all made sense to me. So I think, like I was saying earlier, it should be a pretty large audience for it.
Yeah, I was pretty much targeting the audience of people basically who want to get in the games industry, but they want to kind of know what it is. There's some very general I don't know how should I describe it. The how a company usually communicates. It's very general. They give very short answers. They're not tons and tons of details and anecdotes and stuff like that. And my book is more of the on the ground report of the troops in the trenches. So if you were interested in getting a job in the game industry or something like that, this would be the book that I think would be a little bit more approachable for you.
Yeah, and if I remember right, you mentioned in the book that this is like a diary. You wrote portions of this or a lot of this while in the present or in the past tense, or at the time it was present
Yes.
tense.
Yeah. I 6 months into the project, things were so bad on the project, at least in my area of concern. I was the first 3D level designer Blizzard ever hired. So when they brought me onto the project, I could tell in the interview they were kind of pumping me for information on the production pipeline and how things work and how it just generally goes. And they wanted me to solve a lot of things. And I came from the first person shooter background. I was a modder for a lot of Quake games. And everything that we learned, and that's kind of where we started. John Cash was id Software's networking programming, and he was the tech lead for Warcraft. I'm sorry, Warcraft, Quake 2. And when he came to Blizzard, he was just solving all of their problems as far as for technology leadership. But we found out that everything we tried to apply that the first person shooter industry used for their games just didn't apply to MMOs. And it was like a brick wall after brick wall, and it was a pretty messy experience. Pretty painful experience at the beginning. I just couldn't believe that this was Blizzard. Gosh, I mean, they're supposed to know what they're doing, and they're really good at just releasing only the polished game, and that's what they wanted to be known for. But this is, I think, it humanizes the experience and shows. Hopefully, fans will get an appreciation of what pain is gone through to make a AAA computer game. So.
And just to clarify, so you said you were a modder for the Quake community, but you had never published anything as a paid
No.
position, right?
No, I was I'd done a lot of level design, 4.5 years of level design. And I was working about, God, I don't know how I did this. I would say average crazy hours. Okay. Like more than 40 hours a week as a hobby. I would say closer to 60. I took 8 months off and I was working like easily 100+ hours every single week, just working on my 3D levels. And again, these were just for mods. I was just doing this for fun. And after a few years, I got better and better, and I ended up with a portfolio that was at professional level of polish. So that's what landed me. I didn't know anybody in the industry when I got my first job, and when I moved to Blizzard, I learned that everything that the first person shooter community does, Blizzard does differently. They have very, very different methodologies and philosophies and processes. And I found that just so fascinating. The first day of my work, I learned so much, but it's not what I learned. It's also the things that I had to unlearn. And that process continued for 6 to 9 months. Everything I worked on was eventually thrown out because we were just using the wrong type of geometry, wrong type of editors. Everything was tossed. So I thought it was an interesting story. I mean, I thought it would be cool to celebrate the unglamorous part of making computer games because I found it very fascinating. So it was my first game. And so I didn't realize how hairy games are when they're not built yet. Like games are really not fun and ugly, and they're clunky, and it's really weird at the beginning because as a modder, you're starting with a released project. Like if I'm making modifications of Quake 2 or Quake 3 or Quake 1, I'm starting with an engine that works, of pathing that works, of there's lighting. I know what I can expect from lighting. And when you don't have lighting as a solution when you're starting out, you don't know how to sculpt your 3D modeling, your wireframes. So there's just tons and tons of things that you just take for granted. And I was new to professional development in any case, but I still found it very fascinating.
So you said at one point in there that you're doing at least 20 to 30 hours a week, if not more than that, for 4 years, which comes out to being easily over 10,000 hours over the course of that.
I was a freelancer in I was in Madison Avenue ad agencies. Okay, so I was a freelancer. I was very good at keeping track of my hours, and I did count. Yes, I did get my 10,000 hours.
That's what I'm wondering. Did you feel, because that's like the old adage, if you put 10,000 hours into something, you're finally maybe an expert or a master at that skill.
Right.
Did you feel, at the time you applied to Blizzard, did you feel like you might have been an expert? And then did you still feel that way maybe 3 months into working at Blizzard?
I actually did. I was actually I was very comfortable in the interview because we were well within my wheelhouse. I was interviewed by Eric Dodds and Rob Pardo. They were the two guys sitting across from me, and I was just articulate. I could speak in the vocabulary of a level designer and just talking what are the concerns and the goals of what a level designer is trying to do. I had a harder time hiring people. Once I got to the team, it was my job to find other level designers. That was another thing that I couldn't believe.
Okay.
When I joined Blizzard, I must have gone through, because I'm a modder, Blizzard didn't raid other companies, like we didn't poach on other companies. But so what I was left with was trying to hire other modders, and week after week, I would send 10 or a dozen, maybe half a dozen. Every week, I would send it to the recruiter at Blizzard, and he would look them up and get back to me on whether or not they were interested. We got nobody interested. I found, I think I got 2 interviews out of that first few months, and I couldn't believe most of the really good levels were built by level designers who are already in the industry. And if a level designer, and this is still true, if a level designer is left alone by whoever, whether it's a lore designer, creative director, art director, production, if they're left to do their job, and which is just make these, play spaces cool, they're pretty happy where they are. I mean, it's not like a money thing. Blizzard also paid less than other companies because it was comparable. I was making 80,000 in New York, and I went to 50,000 when I went to Blizzard, and it was because, and this is in the year 2000. It was because Blizzard, that's what they paid for their WarCraft 3 level designers, which it's a completely different job. They're dropping and dragging art assets that are already built. The textures are already painted, and it's all scripting and debugging. So it's a very, very, very different job. My job on World of Warcraft, there's no scripting. Okay, and I'm starting with a gray space in 3ds Max, which you start with a box, and you start 3D modeling the box, and it's a completely different discipline, and there's a lot more involved. So soliciting people from other companies, we had rumors that people in Texas on Star Wars Galaxies, they were being paid 120,000 a year. So what trying to get people on World of Warcraft, that was very, very, very hard to do. Yeah, I had a lot of conversations. So like, guys, nobody wants to come over here. But we had eventually some people applied, and they only needed one really polished level. The first one of Dana only had one polished what was it, Quake 3 level, and that's really what people are looking for when they're hiring onto a game is just a level of polish, not the number of pieces. So
Interesting. Yeah, I think your book goes into a little more detail about the hiring process a little bit. Not a lot of detail, but more detail, and your thoughts on how that went, and when other people were joining the team, how that went, and the team dynamic. So I think for anyone that's interested in that kind of insider scoop, you could say, at Blizzard or just in game development overall, I think your diary is actually going to be very relevant, interesting to them.
right,
I had a lot of fun reading that.
Yeah, and I could have written, honestly, I could have written this story about any game out there. Like, Blizzard's not doing anything that different from the rest of the industry. They're not using different technologies or anything like that. But luckily, World of Warcraft is a common ground that a lot of people can use and say, oh, that's how they did that. Or, oh, okay, so this is, this is their strategy for doing this or that. But yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, if it's okay with you, John, I'd like to get into some of the questions I've got built up for you if you're ready
sure.
for it. We got a big list here, so we'll get through as many as we can. And we'll see what John has to say about all this. So if you're ready, John, I'll get going.
Yep, ready.
Okay, so the first question, we have about 20 of them here, so we'll see what we can do. The first one, if you zone into the Deadmines in vanilla WoW, early on in the instance, there's a wall that you can glitch through, and you can get into an area that gives you terrain that is otherwise hidden, and it contains landscapes and structures that would fit in perfectly in the Outland. Do you know why are those structures hidden there? And can you elaborate on any other hidden structures or terrain like this that did or do currently exist in instance dungeons?
Let's see. Outland was built many, many years after the Deadmines, so I don't think there's any. Yeah, I don't think that there's any actual lore connection between the two. What had happened is, I think the. Well, I wish I knew what the structures look like because I could actually just tell you. But what probably happened is that the dungeon server, when we learned that the dungeon server had crashed, the portal that supposedly takes the player ports them to the parallel dimension that is the dungeon. that wasn't working. So players would run past the trigger that's supposed to teleport them, and they would keep running, and they'd find themselves in an unfinished area. So I would imagine a lot of those areas were, oh boy, I wish I knew what they were, but they might not have been lit. And so they probably were black or gray. And maybe that kind of looked like, oh, there's a picture right there. Let me see this.
Yeah, I sent you a picture. I don't know if that helps at all.
Okay, so this is, we're looking at, those are probably, no, those aren't Outland. Those are Emerald Dream props.
Ah, okay.
This might be from, in fact, this is probably, yeah, this is the Emerald Dream. This, you wouldn't actually land under, it may have ported you to the wrong place, but yeah, this is bring the monsters, say, Yeb, Nib. Yeah, you can see quests here. But no, those props, the Emerald Dream was a outdoor zone that we were going to ship at the very tail end of WoW. We got a really good, yeah, we got a really good artist on the team, Matt Malizia, and he was just so prolific. And even though he, like the Emerald Dream, I don't know if that's a zone yet or whatnot, but the Emerald Dream was just too goofy when we it was very high concept. A lot of the high concept stuff didn't work very well, and when you'd walk around in this zone, it just looked really stupid. You know, unless you're going to overload people with craziness, like when you see floating trees or stuff like that, it just comes across as just kind of weird.
Okay, so it was too out there compared to the rest of the zones in vanilla WoW, maybe. Okay.
Yeah, and what we're probably looking at is just a demo zone of that. I don't think this is actually where the Deadmines would have ported you, because you wouldn't have been on exterior terrain. You would have been on Westfall textures if this were actually in Westfall. So this
yeah, probably... so I've done this a long time ago, but you basically glitch through a wall in the Deadmine zone, and you never port out. You actually land on something that's in the instance dungeon still.
Okay, so you're in the instance dungeon and then you fall out?
Yes, you fall out.
Okay.
And you land on something that kind of looks like this screenshot. There's some other screenshots I'll post on the video later
sure.
that I don't have handy.
Well, okay, so that explains it. Okay, so that's an exterior level designer playing around with props, and there really doesn't add any load to the engine. So it's, they're just goofing around in the area. This was never meant to be seen, and they just didn't.
Right. Okay, that's what I was kind of thinking. It was just someone testing something, maybe. But what struck me as interesting is that they didn't use some, in the open world, they didn't set up some island out somewhere like GM Island, right? They put it inside of the instance, and I always wondered why they did that. And I guess they thought it was maybe more hidden there. And then, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but by the time the game shipped, they forgot about it, didn't have time to bother with getting rid of it since it was so well hidden anyway.
They just didn't care about it. Like the planning to playing around with this, like what you're seeing ahead of you, could have taken 30 seconds.
Okay, I see.
They would spray paint trees, and it would just randomly size them, skew them, rotate them, and it would probably place them I guess apparently above the terrain. And you can see that the very high mountains on the left-hand side are they're not sculpted or anything, so they didn't spend any time in this area. So this could have been 30 seconds worth of work, and then moving on to, working on the Deadmines or using this. Actually, when a level designer is placing the dungeon and they've got exterior terrain, somebody could be standing over their shoulder and said, "Hey, have you seen the trees from Emerald Dream?" And it's, "Oh no, what are they? I've been waiting for those." And they'll place them in some little pasteboard area of the Deadmines, and they'll look at them and say, "Oh, okay, those trees look good. Yeah." And then they'll just go back to the Deadmines, because it takes like 10 minutes to load, save the Deadmines, then open up the Emerald Tree. It's just easier to spray props in there.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
Yeah.
I just always, is it one of those questions you kind of wonder, like, why did they get there? And that seems like it was basically something that spent 30 seconds, maybe a minute for someone to drop in there, and then there's thousands of players that wonder for 20 years, 15 years almost.
You can't read too much into it sometimes.
Yeah, well, that's where I think we're going to go reading into a lot of things with the rest of these questions. So I think we can move on to the second question at this point. So the next question is, why were the islands of Dr. Palidis and Gillijim's Isle removed from the game? Was any content ever planned for them, to your knowledge?
Yeah, so I actually don't know, not to my knowledge, but near the end of the game, once we got up to a respectable level, we began to realize by making leveling faster, players played through zones faster.
That makes sense.
Well, they didn't. I guess what I mean is that they didn't actually see all the content in the zone, but before they were high enough level to leave. Stranglethorn was a big zone, and we didn't need extra islands. And if it's a pain in the ass to get there, then it's easier if you're going to cut content. That's a very clean way of doing it. Just saying,
okay,
those islands be gone.
Well, and yeah, the islands I believe were off the western coast of Stranglethorn Vale, and Stranglethorn Vale, as people probably know, you could level there from almost level 29 to 30 through level 40, 42, and never leave the zone almost. Except if you're getting ganked on a PvP server, you want to run away, but otherwise you could level pretty easily all the way through there.
Right, and it was a fun, beautiful zone too.
Oh yeah, I think most people that played in vanilla have fond memories of Stranglethorn Vale, excluding maybe getting camped at Nessingwary's camp, but otherwise, it's it's a really nice spot. Okay, well that makes sense. It's one of those things. I don't think the islands will ever come back because I don't expect them to add a lot of new zones to the to Azeroth or to Eastern Kingdoms or Kalimdor. But it's interesting that they were there, and the reason makes sense to remove them. And I don't know if you've played modern WoW like Legion or BFA at all, but I've played Legion now for a while and just now started Battle for Azeroth, and it's still true. You can level so quickly now, even faster it feels like, and miss 80% of a zone easily.
That's, and we only have so many slots that we can give people. So once the rewards start being duplicates of one another, it kind of puts pressure on you to even leave the area, even if you're kind of the completist type of person.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, well, that's good. Thank you for the answer on that one. Let's move on. So as I was reading your book, you mentioned that you and Toph Gorham, I don't know if I'm saying his name right. Toph Gorham. What was Toph? What was his position?
He was a concept artist. He was hired the same day that I came to the team.
Okay. So concept artist. So you and Toph were playing WarCraft 3 in what I believe was like a beta or an alpha build. And you were playing and you were changing some things a bit, and you had a suggestion for the team related to changing how high or low the maximum food caps could go. And they ended up implementing that change to some degree, which was pretty significant, in my opinion, based on where WarCraft 3 turned out and where it could have been without that suggestion. So my question is, were there any other team members from, let's say, Team 1, because you were on Team 2, if I recall, any other teams that maybe played WoW in the early alpha and then had a big suggestion like that, and that, radically changed what we saw as the end product of WoW? Can you think of any examples that were input from people outside of the direct WoW team?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when WoW when WoW was pitched, both Team 1 and Team 2 really wanted to make an MMO. They wanted Team 2's project before WoW had failed. It was called Nomad, and EverQuest just came out. And Nomad was kind of born on the, I would say, born on the expectations of making like an Ultima Online type of thing.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
And when EverQuest came out, then both Team 1 and Team 2 said, "Oh, we want to do this, but we want to make it, accessible to players. We want to have private dungeons. We want to have." But Team 1 was bogged down in many redos of WarCraft 3, and so Team 2 was really the only guys. So those guys, you know, they earned their keep on Warcraft 3. That was a tough game to make. So, I mean, Rob Pardo designed the classes, and you know, he took over at the tail end of WoW. Um, he was there for like the last year and got it across the finishing line. And then we had Bob Fitch was a programmer. He managed all the combat equations for the game. Scott Mercer was ninja-ing the 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 like Jeff Kaplan was told that we can't do another raid dungeon. Like Onyxia is all it is. That's what we're doing, you know. And Jeff, he wanted to sneak it in. So I was the big team's ninja. There's a couple of us that had a license to make content on our own, and I was one of them. So people kind of came to me with requests to get stuff into the game. Like as long as I did my tasks on time, then I had the ability to, I had the blessing of the producers to sneak stuff into the game because I could do it without like causing too many ripples. And so Jeff got me to build the Molten Core. I fleshed out the dungeon in roughly, I would say, a day. And then I polished it for the next couple weeks once we had proof of concept that, yeah, we could actually do a raid dungeon. And he's got Scott Mercer, who was he was a level designer on Team One. Scott scripted the World of Warcraft Molten Core. He says he scripted in a week, but it's not the scripting, it's the debugging that's the time-consuming thing. So I'm sure once the producers relented, then they started debugging, and it probably took another 5 to 6 weeks to get it done. But Scott technically was on Team One, so it wasn't a burden. But he eventually came over and became the lead for the dungeon scripting team on WoW. So yeah, there's a lot of cross pollination. Like at the very tail end of a product, everybody on the way we call ourselves Blizzard South, like we all jumped on Warcraft 3 when it like our programmers helped work on the pathing and the frame rate and stuff like that. The artists and the designers, we tested the levels, we scrutinized the artwork, So there's a lot of cross pollination sometimes.
Okay, that makes sense. So that actually was going to be one of my later questions. Specifically, was about the Molten Core rumor or the legend about how long it took from initial thoughts to actually completing it. So would you say it was maybe from 0% to 100% for launch? Was it 6 weeks to complete that? You think?
Oh yeah, I mean there was almost no concept. Jeff came. He had a bunch of monsters. Monsters usually define what you can do with the dungeon. Like if the players have seen the monsters over and over again, we'd have to get new monsters. But he had a whole bunch of giants. They reskinned the giants and the lava dogs. We had We had flame elementals. A lot of cool salamanders we haven't used very much. So we were able to actually put that together. Ragnaros was already built, and he had a circular kind of design, so that's kind of why I went with like this circular type of dungeon layout. It was literally maybe 20 minutes worth of thinking, maybe 5 hours of sketching, and then I had the first iteration, a low polygon pass, in maybe the first day or 2 days, something like that. When Jeff said, "Okay, that's roughly the space that we need," then I could start polishing it, applying the textures in a little bit better way, and lighting it, making it nice.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, so, I mean, Molten Core, to me, is the most memorable raid in Vanilla WoW. Probably because I spent the most time there. I raided there pretty much all the way through, even into Naxxramas when I was raiding. I still would do Molten Core because we had new people that we needed to gear up, and that was one of the easiest ways to do it.
Yeah.
So I hope you feel proud of knowing that something you spent maybe a few weeks on or 20 hours on is actually memorable, probably to thousands and hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of players. 14 years later, I still remember it very well.
Super, I can tell you. It's the only dungeon I ever get compliments on, and I'm kind of embarrassed because it's so primitive. The geometry is so not impressive. Everybody likes the red fog. That's what people like. They respond to the red fog. Oh, the red fog is so cool, cool, cool. And yes, it is very cool. But when you spend, oh my gosh, months and months and months on something, and you like, people really care about the loot. When they talk about dungeons, it's always about the boss fights
Oh yeah, of course,
and the rewards, of course. As far as dungeons go, the dungeon designers actually had to pat themselves on the back if they wanted any compliments. The joke between us were, well, like, nobody ever looks up. Don't even bother doing anything cool. Everybody looks down at the ground. It's all they care about. And the ceiling is actually where you get a lot of the artistry in, because the floor has to be clear. You can't do a whole lot of stuff with the floor, because you can't really predict how the fights are going to be. You don't want people falling off in places that they can't get out of. So you're kind of limited to flat areas. And the ceiling was where we spent the majority of our time. But the way the player camera works, it's above the player looking down the entire time.
Right, of course.
So
right.
It's Sisyphean task.
So, is there any specific dungeon or raid you designed that you would, with the classic WoW coming out, you would want someone to look up at, that you can specifically remember being something you worked extra hard on, let's say, or really took pride in?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think everybody does look up in the Wailing Caverns.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, the central chamber. Let's see. Boy, looking up. My gold mines, probably I'd have to go to my non-instanced stuff, the micro dungeons, the gold mines, and the slag pits were kind of cool.
The slag pits are very cool and very memorable, so I could see that as a good pick.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Cool. I was just curious. It's just maybe I was wondering.
Yeah. Booty Bay was like a good example where we didn't know what we wanted. This grand reveal of this awesome place that's hidden out of Stranglethorn, and we didn't know whether or not to have players look up and go ooh ah, or if start them high and look down. And we kind of just went with what the player camera was doing, and that's why you come in at a high elevation.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. If you're coming in through the little cave from the north side, you're kind of looking down at a high elevation.
Yeah, and it's kind of weird. Like when we had the cave lower, you were underneath the docks, and it was kind of dingy and ratty, and we're like, oh, this isn't exactly, it captures the flavor, but it's not as epic. So we started people high.
Another question, kind of regarding outdoor content, maybe a little bit more. Were there any? What were the team's thoughts, I guess I would say, on people exploring unreleased or quote unquote inaccessible content such as Hyjal in vanilla, or as I previously mentioned, the hidden stuff within the Deadmines? Did the team care if people found these things?
Mostly we were happy when people could. We appreciate ingenuity. Like if they were hacking it, that was probably like, anyone can hack it. But if you could actually swim around the entire continent and find some shelf on the northeastern side of Loteron, and then just find yourself in unfinished, unpolished areas. I even did that when I was playing on the live servers. On the live servers. So I thought that people pretty much thought it was kind of cool. As far as the official thing is like, well, we don't want people to take ugly screenshots of the game, so we tried to minimize that as much as possible. But we just honestly respected people who could actually circumnavigate our obstacles.
Yeah, I mean, that seems fair to me. I know, I don't think, I used to do a lot of exploring, and I don't think I knew of anyone that got banned, but I do know of GMs that would maybe teleport you out if they saw you somewhere you weren't supposed to be.
Sure, yeah.
Which seems kind of reasonable.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, and I remember, even now, there's a huge WoW secret finding community. There's a few of them, really, in modern WoW even, so that sort of exploration spirit that was generated with the launch of WoW seems to still be alive today.
Yeah, I think that's cool. I mean, exploration. I mean, it's exciting. I mean, it's honestly what I would do. It's like, I think one of the coolest things people did is what they did is they kited one of the worms in Silithus that has knockback as one of their attacks,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and they used knockback to catapult themselves over the wall of southern Silithus into Ankarash area.
Oh yeah, I never thought of
But
that. I could see
but
that.
this wasn't actually the instance of Ankarash, so they were actually in an unfinished area. So they got to see all the seams of our game and stuff. And that's the thing. I honestly, as a dev, I think that's just the coolest thing in the world. I mean, it's so the best hack was one of our artists, Roman Kenny. When during the alpha, what he did, we only had a few playable. The first zones we did was like Elwyn, Westfall, Red Ridge. We had a few zones. What Roman would do is he would take a flight path from like one zone to another, and when he was flying over a unfinished or no fly zone or no go zone, he would do something that got him dismounted from the Griffin. He would die. He would res at the graveyard. Then he would walk up to a vendor, and in trade chat he would say, "Who wants to buy?" And he would click something that's on the vendor that's way higher level than what anybody had access to. And everyone was like, "Oh yeah, 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 me."
That's
And
awesome.
but yeah, so that's why you can't dismount while you're flying one of the taxis.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's funny. Though. I can see it's funny hearing about devs abusing mechanics in some
Oh,
way.
absolutely. That's the first thing we do. Oh yeah, it's penises and exploits.
I mean, it makes sense. I think you guys will try and abuse as many things as you can, but then you're still not going to catch all the things that players, of course, because there's so many more players than devs.
Yeah.
But you try to maybe weed out some of the more obvious ones, at least that way.
Sure.
So speaking of hidden areas, such as getting behind the wall in Silithus before the Ankarash launch, I remember there was a smiley face, like a texture underneath Karazhan in Deadwind Pass in Vanilla WoW. Do you know who put that there, and if there's any meaning behind it or any reason besides just being funny?
Just being funny. That's probably Matt Sanders. He's the one who I think he picked up the zone. He picked up Deadwind Pass once we were placing Karazhan, and it's just a way of that's him waiting for us, actually me in particular. I modeled the exterior of Karazhan. He's waiting for me to give him something to place, and he's just using that circle as that's roughly the area, that's the footprint of Karazhan. And because we're working crazy hours, we get punchy, and so we just start doing silly things like putting circles, smiley faces on circles and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. I didn't think there'd be more of a story to that in terms of any real meaning behind it, but yeah, it's one of the. There's another smiley face I'm forgetting where, at least one more that I know of.
Oh, everywhere. I mean, you think it's funny as a player, if you're forced only through the player's perspective, you're seeing the world as like a little an ant basically going across the landscape. The level designers, when they have their painting tools, they zoom out to like where their perspective is that of like a satellite orbiting like the planet, so they can see the entire zone at once. And they move their cursor and it spray paints a different texture. They can write words and messages and arrows and X's, and just kind of that's how they lay out the size of the zone.
Okay, yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, it'd be. I can imagine how cool it must look to zoom all the way out and really see all of Azeroth, for example, in one big zoom out and see the change from zone to zone. You can obviously tell that the color palette changes significantly from zone to zone.
Right.
The elevation. There's a lot of cool things like that I'm sure you could observe very quickly.
Yeah, well, you could only check out a few chunks of terrain at a time, so you actually couldn't see it as a globe. I've seen tech demos of the entire world of both Azeroth and Kalimdor in the same piece of geometry, but that wasn't within the engine. That was just a rendering test. But,
I see. Okay, interesting, cool. So, one thing in your book you mentioned, it's not exactly related to this, but you mentioned that the server costs were, really high, and the server costs directly impacted, I believe, the storage space for players, such as banks and bags.
Right.
And is that right?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
So the question is, do you know if you guys had in mind more bag and bank slots for players originally than the 16 slot starting bag? Because I know server limitations. I believe there was server limitations that limited debuff slots to 8 early on, and then later on in vanilla were upped to 16.
That's correct. Yeah, that would just be the amount of traffic that the server can broadcast the status of, so many conditions efficiently. Yeah, when we were deciding like how it was actually not even is the database players would figure out how many bytes. It wasn't kilobytes, it was bytes. How many bytes of information does it take to track an item? What's the very minimum? Because you can't go over on these servers. I mean, you just can't. So what they did is they figured that out. They say, okay, there's how many slots on the character, how many bags on the character. If each account has, I think, eight characters was the starting configuration. If all those characters, all those characters, all those bags, all the bags which have, all the banks that each one of those characters have, they figure out how much an account, because they're making sure that they could afford to support the number of people. So it's kind of funny. Our server programmer, Joe Rumsey, was kind of the guy that decided how many, bags, he would give Mark Kern, he'd mostly keep track of the business side of things, and the designers, of course. They kept the designers in the loop. No, the designers were there to give their thumbs up, saying, okay, that sounds like enough, or that doesn't sound like enough. So as long as those three people were happy, then that's kind of the decision. And it was made long before any items were even made. Long before any items were made.
Okay, so if WoW had been released, 4 years later, for example, things could have been a lot different in terms of debuff slots or bag slots or bank slots.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Technology changes. I mean, the server purchase was the largest in the world. I mean, of that type of server, by far. I mean, it was just beyond anyone had ever even speculated. And it's kind of funny. People try to compare their hard drive space to the saying, well, I've got, I don't know how many gigabytes here. It only cost me so much money, and the blades on the servers are way more expensive megabyte for megabyte, because those servers cannot fail. They're absolutely the most highest end engineered, because you can't lose data. You can never ever lose customer data. And hard drives fail, so you couldn't use the the box that you and I use at home. You had to use these different type of machines. So yeah, it was a big consideration. It was money.
I mean, I remember having downtime in the first year or two after release, and Blizzard rewarding players with free game time to compensate players when the servers were down longer than expected. So I can imagine if they had lost character data, like a week's worth or days worth even, that would have been catastrophic in a lot of ways.
It could have been an hour's worth, but in that hour, somebody had downed the server first of some mob or some super rare drop. That would have been an account ending experience. So when you have something that's a rare drop and you can't substantiate, like if the data that you've had that thing goes away, and Blizzard can't just trust the players.
Oh, of course not. Of course not.
You can't just ring the dinner bell and say, okay guys, what did you guys lose in that hour?
Right, everyone's running around with Thunder Fury and Sephiroth. Yeah, of course. Right. Yep, that makes perfect sense to me. But to my knowledge, I never lost any character data. I never had any
No,
significant
no data
rollbacks, if
was
any.
no in the 10 years that I was on WoW. I don't think it's ever happened. Um, like the servers were purchased on a loan. Like we couldn't afford the servers, and at the time, Vivendi Universal used to own Blizzard. They're now called Vivendi, but their stock price had just tanked. Their CEO was being chased through the streets of Paris by paparazzi over scandals. He went to prison. So there was no money coming out of our parent company. So Blizzard had to take loans to be able to afford servers. So that's kind of how poor we were. I'll use poor in quotations.
I mean, it definitely. WoW was, in general, MMORPGs, even now, are huge investments, right? And at the
Oh,
time, WoW,
huge.
I remember when it launched, they had, I don't know, maybe 60 servers, I'm not sure. And then,
That sounds right.
or realms, I should say, not necessarily servers, but realms. And those realms, that rapidly increased to over 100, I think, within the first year or so.
Sure. Yeah, like once we had proof of concept saying, hey, look, banks, we got a hit on our hands. We could probably borrow more money and just get servers ramped up. But it took time. I mean, it takes a lot of time to configure those servers. I mean, nobody buys servers like that. In fact, just to process credit cards for the rush of players, there wasn't any packages that were even remotely affordable. We actually had to write our own software for the freaking credit cards because the crush of people all signing up at the same time. I'm doing this Kickstarter, and the Kickstarter there's it takes weeks to collect money. Now I don't think it's actually gonna take that long, but it's a slower process. So yeah, there's a lot of business stuff that players don't
Oh
realize.
yeah, I can attest that Blizzard is very very good at charging me very very quickly when I click to purchase something. I'm sure many
Yeah,
people can agree. Click that purchase button. There's very rarely any hang up. It goes through very quickly, which is good.
even on like opening day and stuff.
Uh well, I'm thinking
Because that's the day that you can't go down,
oh yeah,
especially
yeah
because
yeah.
that's your first impression, and that's like I remember Mark Kern telling me he was stressed out at the end, and I was like, "How you doing, Mark? How are things going? Just try to like bring him down to earth type of thing." And he was just talking about the server purchases, how nervous he was. He has a law degree, and he would joke about how useless his law degree was, but when you're signing contracts with that are many, many millions of dollars for things, it comes with a contract, and you're responsible for a lot of careers and a lot of money and a lot of responsibility. And he just told me how much we had to have a stable release for vanilla WoW. Like that's the one expense. Blizzard's a very frugal company, at least at the time they were. They were very frugal with everything, and that's the one thing they would not skimp money on. They did everything they possibly could to make the launch, because there was a stink with MMOs that the launch was always unstable, the code was unstable, the servers were not stable, and when it turns out that a configuration with the hardware by the hardware manufacturer, not even one of our tech guys, that was the culprit to the Blizzard um, meltdown when the 2004 WoW came out. So,
Huh. Well, I will say the Battle for Azeroth launch, the night of the launch, it was a worldwide launch at like 5 or 6 p.m. local time for
yeah.
me,
Uh-huh.
and I think it went pretty well. What ended up happening is some of the high pop servers, like the Illidan US server, that was down, I believe, for about 6 hours for the most part. But that didn't, to me, that's not that bad.
That's not bad.
That was just some
No,
of the high
that's
pop servers apparently. So
right.
I think they've gotten better and better, and that's their first, I think, worldwide simultaneous launch, which is, I'm sure they learned some things, and the next time
Oh,
they'll be a little more ironed out. Even I hope.
you can't imagine how complicated it is. When I first my first Kickstarter, I did a million things wrong, okay, for this book. I did it in March. It was just such a failure. But I learned, I talked to someone from Czechoslovakia. They wanted to know if I was going to translate the book into Czech. And I was like, well, that's really not on the top of my list of things to do right now. But I talked to the person that they had translated other Blizzard books, and we were dealing with the same person as far as licensing. Their counsel for product licensing, and they were waiting for for Blizzard to get back to them. And it just occurred to me that every single book that Blizzard does, every translation for everything has its own licensing agreement, and it just boggles like my mind the amount of legal agreements that company must have with every service that they use in every country. It's just crazy how complicated it is.
Yeah, I have zero expertise in anything legal, thankfully, I guess. So I can't comment on it much, but I'm not a company as big as Blizzard. It doesn't surprise me that they have probably a vast legal department that is very, very active in a lot of different ways. It doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Going back to the stuff related to the servers almost, in your book you mentioned that the game Animal Crossing, which came out actually originally for, I think, the Nintendo 64 disk drive in Japan, but in the US it launched on the GameCube. You said that game had an influence on WoW, related to like the day-night cycle, I guess you could say. Were there any other games that weren't MMOs that had a drastic impact on WoW?
Well, no matter how bad an MMO was, and they were mostly bad before World of Warcraft, there were some really stinky ones that nobody even played. Our game designers, they played through them. They suffered through them because every once in a while you'll see something that's neat about their interface, like how they communicate in chat or how they do a button for, I don't know, pull down menu or something. Even the worst games have some little nugget that's kind of interesting. I wonder if we could solve that in a different way, or like what are they going for? Pretty much everything. I would say probably Dark Age of Camelot showed that the Horde Alliance split happened after Dark Age of Camelot. Dark Age also proved that PvP could be fun and consensual and also safe. There's nothing but, like, every game was ganking before Dark Age, I believe, and that was the first one that said, PvP can actually be fun, because most of the game designers on World of Warcraft were very much against PvP, almost in any form, because they didn't believe that it could be governed in such a way that you couldn't grief other people. So we just didn't see any other examples. So just seeing, oh, you could just do it by zones, like that concept is just, it's so a matter of fact nowadays that Anarchy Online proved that we could do instance servers. Those were I think the first private dungeons. Little bits of just any games. I mean, people are ravenous. That's everyone at Blizzard plays games. Everyone, CEO down to the secretary. So yeah, pretty much all games do.
Okay, well that makes sense. Yeah, I know at the launch of WoW, I mean they had obviously PvP and PvE realms, and they had RP realms. I think our role-playing PvP realms didn't come till a little bit later, actually, but if I remember right. But the PvP system, there was no implementation of it at the beginning of WoW, right? We didn't have the honor system, and Battlegrounds didn't come around until I think patch 1.6.
Yeah,
I hope I got that right.
No, Battlegrounds were like 8 months after the game shipped.
Yeah, I remember, if I remember right, there was a patch where the honor system came out, and it existed in the game, but Battlegrounds didn't exist yet. There was one patch in between the PvP system and the Battleground system, or maybe just like a mini, like a portion of a patch. And I remember that being one of the most fun times of WoW to me, because then there was incentive to PvP, and there was no instanced PvP. So the only way to PvP was to go to the Crossroads or Terran Mill. Those were the two big fighting points.
Oh yeah, that's the end of my book. Yeah, the forget what was Tarn Mill in what zone? Oh, Hillsbrad. That's right.
Yes, right. And
Hillsbrad.
it was north of South
Oh
Shore.
yeah, and the reason why that became. Do you know why the reason why that became the PvP zone? Can you guess?
I mean, I know I always thought that it was near Undercity, but so that would be good for the Horde to some capacity, but I really don't know, honestly.
The reason why, and I know this is where like I my multiplayer experience with Quake games comes through. It's because it was a fast respawn. The graveyards were right next to each other, and so there's no downtime from dying. You die and you release, and you're only 100 yards away from combat again. You're not traveling across the zone. It was one of the few zones where the Horde and the Alliance had graveyards kind of next to each other.
Was that intentional with the idea of PvP in mind, or is that just kind of
Completely random,
coincidence? Okay.
completely organic. So many things were just happen organically.
Huh. That's I mean, honestly, that was that patch where the PvP ranking system was there, but not the battlegrounds yet. That was one of the most fun maybe
Yeah.
months or so I ever had playing WoW, because
Yep.
it was
Yep.
just honestly I was on a PvE server, so we had to opt in to PvP, and
Okay.
there was still just tons of PvP out there, and it was it was a blast. Like I don't even know if I was max level yet at that point, to be honest, but I still had so much fun. It was a great patch in my opinion, and I think the PvP system. I mean, it still exists today, right? The honor system and battlegrounds and arenas, they've changed it a lot, but it still is. There's a big PvP component to WoW now. I have no experience with it in modern WoW. I'm terrible at PvP, but
Yeah.
I do see that Blizzard likes to advertise the kind of the esports aspect of it through the arena matches and such.
Yeah. It's a lot more formal now. Yeah, with it's kind of weird. It was PvP was kind of like a throwaway for many years, even after it launched. I think I was on I think I was on a role playing PvP server. I think Mal'Ganis was. That's where I was, and I'm sure people will correct me, and but maybe I was just in a role playing guild. Maybe that was it, but we were definitely on a PvP server, and yeah, that. Hillsbrad was so much fun. The It took a long time because when they're balancing classes, uh, the game designers really cared only about PVE. It was all about the raid experience, and if rogues had a hard time attacking shaman, then so be it. Too bad. That's just the way it was. There were just going to be class imbalances. I think it's more class. I think they actually, I don't know how it is. It's been since Cataclysm since I've played World of Warcraft, so it's been a long time for me. So I actually don't know how it's uh, implemented now. But yeah, for at least a long time while I was there, it was not the highest consideration because it was all about raid content.
So you played from vanilla through Cataclysm. I played vanilla, Burning Crusade, and then quit WoW probably 3 months into Burning Crusade. I cleared Karazhan and Gruul's Lair and then quit. And
Right.
I restarted in Legion last year in April. So I missed everything in between, and I'm leveling a character. Right? I mean,
Well, good.
so
All
much.
right.
So
Yeah.
I'm leveling a Worgen Warlock right now without any heirlooms, and I'm just going through. And I've been playing this tune for months, like 6 months or something now. I think
Uh
I'm
huh.
level 94. Like I'm very casual. So, but
Sure, that's great.
it's been great seeing all the zones and how things have changed and how questing has changed and leveling has changed. And so here's kind of a segue into the next question. So Worgens are to me, they're a new playable race. Not they weren't there in the launch of WoW. And in your book, you mentioned that Naga were considered as a playable race early in WoW's development, but you eventually removed them or never fully implemented them because of their geometry or the character models in a way. Was there a reason they were never revisited as a playable race?
Oh, absolutely. I think I don't know who. I'm probably I can only remember Carlo Aureliano did a concept sketch. I don't know if it was the first concept for Naga, but he was on the WoW team, and who knows, maybe that was just the WoW version of the Naga.
I
But
think Naga existed in Warcraft
oh yeah, yeah.
3, but I don't
But
know, since
the
that was
two
also in development at the time, I don't know which came first internally.
Well, that sometimes happened. Like one team would come up with a sketch, and the other team, because it's the same universe, the other team would go, "Oh yeah, let's do it that way." So I actually don't know who came up with it. Yeah, they were certainly doing Naga in Warcraft 3, probably because they got the boat technology working, and so that it makes sense to do aquatic, uh, antagonists. So the geometry for the naga, it was the creature design itself. Without the legs, it means you can't put it on a mount. It means you can't put it into a vehicle. You don't get as much armor. All the spikes on their back prevents capes. You can't do anything with helmets. It was just a disaster. It would be a disaster for a player race because they would never be able to you know put on really cool armor. I mean, I played a druid, and I kind of bummed out that, as a tree or as a cat or as a bear, I never got to see my new armor when I'm playing my role. So it's you got to be able to have a bipedal creature because it takes way too much uh, tweaking to fit armor pieces around a non-bipedal creature. So that's pretty much it.
Again, I have no game development experience, but that seems I can agree with that. I mean, it makes sense to me. I kind of, when I was reading, the word geometry in there, I sort of assumed that's what you meant, is that because they're basically, mermaids in a sense. They don't walk in the same way as other characters. They can't ride mounts. They can't equip shoes. And so it seems like you'd have a lot of people playing Naga that all look pretty much the same, except for maybe a helmet and a chest piece or something, or the weapon. So that seems like a reasonable reason to eliminate them.
Even the Tauren's horns were a huge pain in the ass because none of the other races had horns that you had to manipulate the helmet around, and they didn't want horns that just projected right through the headpiece. So that was one thing, and that's a one thing all the items guys put off to the very, very end, and they just they hated the Tauren. Like it was a big pain in the butt. Um, so I can't imagine how bad a Naga would be.
Yeah, thinking about all the playable races now, I think they all fall into the kind of two-legged bipedal humanoid shape. I don't think. I mean, even recently, orcs now are upright. They have the option to be standing upright instead of kind of hunched over.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
okay.
so even that, they streamlined it maybe even further for the developers that way, in a sense. I'm sure they did it for other reasons also, but I bet that simplifies things a little bit more too.
Oh yeah, vastly.
Yeah. So one other thing, another question. Let's move on. So Quel'Thalas, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but I believe it's Quel'Thalas.
That's correct.
Was it planned to be released with vanilla at all? There was
Nope.
Okay, so there's an early minimap that shows some work done in the zone, and it seems like it was later scrapped and remade, and just so it was never intended to be in vanilla well.
Right. Sometimes you get a level designer who has time on their hands and they're just playing around with stuff. So they would have done that, and it would have been one of those times when they realized that the Eastern Plague Lands has so much content already and people are already hitting 60 that if we're going to do Quel'Thalas, let's do it right and make it a meaningful zone. Let's not have another Swamp of Sorrows or, just zoned blasted lands that just don't get a lot of traffic in. So save it for an expansion because it's fun to have revisit Azeroth. I mean, you don't want to leave the continent entirely. So I'm kind of glad, and I wish they had actually saved some more of those zones for. I'm sure. Honestly, now that I think about it, they probably redid some of those zones for different levels on Cataclysm. And I think about it. So.
Oh, I'm sure they did. I mean, obviously, a lot of the stuff had been redone, so that would
Right.
fit in well. Yeah. So you mentioned Swamp of Sorrows. There, that's the first thing that came to mind. Does that like stick out among the level designers as being a particularly bad zone, or is it just that it was not trafficked and not heavily used?
It was redundant, and it's honestly it gets down to, you know, players will always take the path of least resistance, and if it's an extra 2 minutes flight to get there, then very few people will go there unless they've actually gotten sick of the other levels. If it's a Ashara was a pain in the neck because it was uh, Darkshore also suffered from not having a round zone. A round zone plays faster because all there's less traveling. All traveling is downtime, and so if you have a crescent shaped zone where there's not a flow from one area to another, like Ashara, those cliffs really hurt the flow in that area. So it is not a popular zone at all.
Oh yeah,
Um,
I Azshara seems like it yeah, I totally agree. It does not seem like a very heavily trafficked zone ever, and it seemed like it didn't have a lot of quests either, to be honest. I don't know if that was intentional or just coincidental.
it just happened. It turns out that once the exterior, well, once the game designers look at it and they go, well, this we could quest it out the wazoo, it's still not going to be popular. Then they just decide to go light on that area, and it's okay that some areas are busier than others because that's you know sometimes
Well, not
variation is
everything has to be
yeah
equal necessarily, right?
exactly yeah.
So,
There's no reason to so.
huh, okay, cool. That makes sense. So another question here. This one's about an alpha build of Programmer Island, and in that there's a texture, and I think this must have been a joke between the developers. It says
Yeah.
"Chow is my love monkey," and it's written there. So, who is Chow? Who wrote this? What is there any backstory to this that you can recall?
Yeah, there's a little backstory. Okay, so Programmer Isle was where everybody tested things. Okay, so if a quest designer was testing something, if a programmer was testing something, that's where they would do it because if there's a bug, they don't want to introduce bugs into the playable zones. So that's why they had Programmer Island in the first place. So I have a little chapter dedicated. It's almost a tongue-in-cheek chapter. It's got some crazy stuff. I don't think I have the picture of Chow as my love monkey, but I do refer to it. Jeff Chow was one of our programmers,
Oh, okay,
and
okay.
so it's just one one programmer or designer maybe just poking somebody else, just goofing around. So uh, programmer Programmer Isle was very crashy. Very crashy. Like you couldn't just walk across. One simply doesn't walk across Programmer Isle because when there's bugs and stuff and they abandon stuff, they're not going to fix bugs that they don't care about. Like this is not a non-player, it's a pasteboard basically. So it was a very crashy area. So it was just a really weird area in the game.
Oh, okay, yeah. I'll send you a picture of the Chow with my love monkey. I have a screenshot of it saved somewhere later
Okay.
on, just so you can check it out again. So speaking of another kind of hidden isle area, uh, the Dragon Isles were shown as concept art in the original WoW credits, and also in an
Oh
art
yeah.
book that I think came
Oh
out
yeah.
around WoW's launch, or maybe the first year or two. They also appeared on the world map unlabeled until around Wrath of Lich King's release. Was there ever any
Right.
ADT data for the Dragon Islands, or was it just conceptual?
I actually did the building. I loved the octopus building. It was one of the first things I had done. Um, we didn't know, we wanted something safe to work on, and we didn't know how big to build dungeons. Dana Jan was the first guy to get a dungeon textured in the game, and so he was kind of the test, the guinea pig for the dungeons. And we wanted him, rather than all of us building dungeons and then realizing, oh, the dungeons have to be bigger, or the dungeons have to be linear, or the dungeons have to be this or that. It's better to just have one guy building dungeons. So other people built cities and buildings. I was doing Dragon Isles. That was actually a raid. There was four. It was kind of abandoned for a number of reasons. My geometry was probably one of them. It wasn't. It was kind of cool,
Wait.
but
So we had a possible another raid in Vanilla WoW, but we can blame you for it not existing because of your designs. Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, a couple things. A couple things. Mine was one. My geometry wasn't that bad. The problem was the floor space. I had no idea how many people were in a raid. You know, I didn't know if it was 5 people, 10 people. We didn't know how big a party was. So the rating came at the very tail end of the project, and it was just basically forgotten. It was just it was is beyond the scope of vanilla WoW. So with players fighting dragons, and it turns out that Metzen was insistent that all the dragons in World of Warcraft be good, except the black dragons. So, which kind of cheesed off the game designers, going, well, why are we even bothering having all these good dragons? Players can't be fighting good dragons, too often. And, there's only so many excuses to have a green dragon be corrupt or, charmed or something like that. So, there's no reason to have 4 islands because black dragons are the only bad, so as yeah, unfortunately, we didn't have a whole lot of dragon fighting in World of Warcraft, but we just didn't need the zone. It was, um, so it was kind of like a placeholder type of thing.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I do have a question. You mentioned the octopus building. Did Was that building ever in game on like Designer Island or Programmer Island? Am I
Oh yeah,
okay?
yeah,
It
yeah.
was right. 'Cause I remember seeing this. I think.
Yes. I think it was on Designer Island or Programmer Island. I lobbied poor Jeff and Alex Alfresavi. I lobbied them a couple times. Hey, how about let's get into that octopus building? Carlo Aureliano did the sketch for that, and it was my favorite concept sketch in the game because I build dungeons and interiors, and it's kind of hard to do a concept sketch for interior. Like when you get a concept sketch for like a dwarven area or a night elf area, what the concept artists usually do, they'll do the bed or the dresser, the desk, or they'll do the props. Okay, but the architecture usually isn't something that concept artists, especially interior architecture, it's hard to represent that. And like the reverse is true. Once you build a 3D environment, taking a screenshot, all the screenshots really suck. Only when you're on the interior are the screenshots really good. And so when you get a concept sketch, the good ones are for exteriors of buildings like Karazhan. I think Brian Morstro did the uh, exterior concept for Karazhan. Brian went on to being the art director for Diablo 3, but then uh, Carlo Aureliano did the squid building that we're talking about, and I just I just loved to see it in game. It was such a cool concept.
And just, I think you mentioned this already, but the octopus building, that you had like a vision for that to be a part of the Dragon Islands. Is that true?
Yeah, that was the temple at the end of the Dragon Island. Who knows why people were killing dragons, but it was the concept was an old god building. We had only a couple other old god buildings. On Karash was one of them. I built it to look like a giant scarab, but apparently you couldn't actually see the temple from far away, so you could never tell that the slices through the building kind of mimic the scarab icon that you see in Egyptian hieroglyphics.
Yeah,
So
I honestly, I've been to Ankarash a lot, and I had no idea that
yeah, I
that was
know.
the
Goes
case. So,
right over your head. And these are the risks that you take when you're building geometry and doing art for a game that you don't know, like what the player camera is going to be. You don't know what the far clip, you don't know how far people are going to see in the game or from what vantage. So that's just the risks that you take. And, the Dragon Isles was another thing, building uh spaces. I didn't know how big, like that octopus temple was cool, but all the spaces inside it were just too small for a raid, like an epic, uh, have this big epic outdoor experience that ends with what? This tiny little fight in a room. It kind of didn't make a lot of sense. So,
Okay, well, it's nice to hear the story of the octopus building. Did you ever have a name for it, or was that as far as it got?
That's pretty much. It was like the old god temple.
Okay,
Maybe that's
that's good
probably the
enough for me.
colloquial name.
It's a very cool concept art, though. It really is. And the building itself, even though it wasn't completed, it does look pretty cool. So,
Oh,
yeah.
thanks.
Okay, so speaking of things that we saw in early WoW that never made it to launch, I think it's the E3 2003 WoW announcement trailer. There was like a 1 second clip in there in Loch Modan where you see a dark portal in the background, just barely. And apparently, dark portals were used as placeholders for instances in the early WoW alpha builds. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Do you know if there was any instance planned for Loch Modan?
I think I can correct you on that. I don't remember them. They were probably used as place markers because the trigger to a new zone is invisible. Like, I mean, why would you have a visible trigger? So that's probably they just placed a dark portal prop over a trigger area because it kind of made sense. Lore wise, it was never ever. Chris Metzen didn't even know that dark portal was probably placed there because they wanted cool assets to do. That was so early in the game that Loch Modan was probably just the new texture set. You know that's probably why they even filmed it there, is because it was just the newest shiny thing on the team, and maybe the most polished area, texture set. So yeah, there was never a dark portal there.
Okay, that makes sense to me. I know. I think you mentioned in your book that a lot of the early accomplishments of the team were getting 8 people or 12 people together at the same time on the test server, and then running around together, fighting each other. So I guess some of that E3 trailer, maybe all of it, was any character we saw running around was a WoW developer controlling it. Is that true?
Yeah. I described it. That's probably the funniest parts. If you go to my website, whenitsready.com, I think I described that's one of the excerpts because it's so funny.
It is really funny. I know exactly what part you're talking
Yeah,
about.
it was
good.
just such a joke. I remember I talked to Shane when I first presented this book. I talked to Shane DeBeery. He was my old roommate back in the day, and we he was just reminiscing, like, you know what, at the time I was just thinking, how can we promote this game? Like, we don't want to show, we don't have any dungeons, we can't show our cities, there's nothing, so let's just try to film us running around. And at the time we didn't have any damage, like those were just combat animations that would trigger, like none of our abilities were there. It was so hard to coordinate. It was just, oh, what a funny time that was.
I mean, it sounds like people are having a lot of fun, especially if they could log in long enough to not have the server crash on them.
It was so not fun. It was the opposite of fun. It was tempers being lost fun. That like, it was trying to coordinate people because we didn't have. I think there was a limit to the speakerphones, like our conference call. So we're shouting through the hallways. Okay, everybody, on 3, I want you to run down the zone, or on 3, everybody start fighting one another. Horde don't fight horde, alliance don't fight alliance, fight each other, and just trying to coordinate movement. It was just impossible because we couldn't tell who was who in the game. And so when somebody was doing something wrong and someone was always doing something wrong, they'd have to yell, "Who's doing that? Stop doing that!" And we're doing this across the building. Like, it was not fun.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it sounds like it could be fun, but I can see how it's frustrating. And
this may be fun for the first half hour.
Right. Like if you're doing this for a day straight, or weeks and weeks and years,
6 hours into it, it's so not fun.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So so the portal in Loch Modan, that answers that question pretty well, I think. So, so another one, I think we have a few on here about the Deadmines. So the Deadmines, I think they have a relatively early or small map ID. I think it's 34 or something. And the minimap in the Deadmines shares texturing similarities with Westfall, which is the zone in which
Correct.
the Deadmines portal is sequestered.
Yeah,
So with that in mind, was the Deadmines ever an outdoor area originally and later transformed into an instance, or and if so, how early was that done? Because I think there's alpha WoW clients that float around on the internet. There's a 0.5.3 version, and that has the Deadmines as an indoor instance. So we're just wondering if there's any connection between the Deadmines and Westfall in terms of whether they were ever the same zone of some capacity.
Yeah, I devote a whole chapter to all the paradoxes that happen with instances. We learned to like what an instance actually is. We call it its own world tab. It's a parallel dimension that you're teleported to. Okay, so once you pass through the portal, you hit a trigger that sends your character to a different server, the dungeon server, and that dungeon server has many parallel dimensions, and in that dimension they copy and paste the Deadmines. Okay, or not, I'm sorry. They copy and paste Westfall, and that's where the actual dungeon geometry for the Deadmines is. And so the plan was you wind through the Deadmines and you leave, and you're on the shore of this fake Westfall. Okay, and you learn story wise that what they're doing is building a dreadnought or a juggernaut behind everybody's backs. You now have to warn the quest giver, and that's how that the story unfolds. But then somebody goes, well, what if I jump into the water? Like, do and I swim to shore? What happens? And nobody really knew how to answer that. We'll say, well, we'll just put cliffs so that you can't get actually onto that fake Westfall, because that's not Westfall, that's fake Westfall. So, and there's only a few chunks of world terrain there. The rest of Azeroth isn't there. So once you get there, well, what if I decide to swim all the way down through Stranglethorn? Well, because we didn't want to have invisible walls. That's one of the things that we were trying to uh, avoid. And so we couldn't think of any way of actually stopping players from getting over to, and we couldn't just put a whole bunch of instance portals surrounding the uh, Deadmines, because then that would be weird, because it would be a one-way teleport. Like, what if you accidentally swam out there and you didn't finish your quest or the dungeon? There's just a whole bunch of problems. So there's another problem with it, is like, what if you were in Westfall, you go to that area, you look out there, and there's no juggernaut, like you don't see it. And it's kind of weird that even if you build a facade like a fake version, you can just jump over there and swim there. Like, it couldn't have exactly the same geometry. So to just avoid all these things, you just build the Great Wall of China between the instance server and the world server, and we enclosed it inside of a giant cave. And that prevents people from leaving the instance and going to the world. But that made a whole bunch of other problems, because that was the largest interior space that we had. And so we heard a whole bunch of gripes from the graphics programmers going, well, if we allow them to build this giant cavern, then that's how all the level designers are going to build their levels, because level designers don't listen to anybody sometimes. So that's exactly what we did. But the programmers are in charge of making sure frame rate runs smoothly, and we didn't know if a big space like that would break the frame rate. As luck would have it, it didn't. So that's the whole story with that.
Okay, yeah. So that reminds me that in Shadowfang Keep, and did you design Shadowfang Keep, or is that a different level designer?
No, that was Aaron. Aaron and I were advocates of getting players on the parapets. Like, when you're on the walls of Shadowfang, that's one thing we felt very strongly of, is that we wanted to show people, if you're in a castle, don't you want to look down at the village beneath the castle? I mean, how freaking cool is that? There's no way. And so that's, I think, once the Deadmines happened, the next dungeon I think that got textured was Shadowfang. Aaron built Shadowfang, and I was a strong advocate for it, so I wanted to do that with my dungeons as well. So once we realized we could copy and paste uh, that and keep players, like if you jump down, I think it just sends you to the graveyard.
So that's what I was going to comment on. Most of the time if you jump down, I think it actually just portals you outside the instance and you just wind up right at the front entrance.
Okay.
But there is a spot where you can jump off of and actually escape the Shadowfang keep itself, but not you don't
really?
zone out. So you can actually then enter the outside. You're still in the instance, but you're in the open area, and you can actually just wander around. You can go down, and you can eventually hit an invisible wall. I mean, because for a while, because as far as the players can see from up on the top of the castle, it's textured. There's trees. There's a village. Everything. But eventually you get far enough out and the textures, I think, start to disappear, but definitely like the trees and things disappear and you eventually hit an invisible wall. So there is a little spot that players have found out you can jump out of and actually explore kind of inside.
I totally believe it. Let me tell you, even when I first joined, John Cash, he came from id Software. He had worked with all the id level designers, and he would tell the producers how unexpected it was for players. You can't contain players. They're so impossibly hard to contain into a space, because he had heard that on added software where someone would always rocket jump to a ledge that, like, how did you get up there? How on the heck are you exploiting the geometry of the map that way? And it's just a natural inclination people have, that they explore, and it's really hard to predict how players will get around the barricades and the barriers between the playable areas and the non-playable areas. So I totally believe that there's that spot.
Yeah, it's a cool spot to explore, and I think I think a lot of people are going to be curious to see when Classic WoW launches whether these types of things will be tuned and fixed, or if they're just going to leave them alone. It depends in a lot of ways how they go about creating Classic WoW.
There's going to be new spots. Like in fixing old spots, they're going to bump something, and it's going to put a slope that is climbable through our collision system that allows people. It's just impossible. It's just impossible to fix them all. But once you find them, once you find them, you can fix them. But it'll be interesting to see if they do it.
Yeah, I'm certainly. I think when Classic WoW launches, besides leveling up, and going through raids and all those, the things most people would like to do, I'm personally really excited to see what I can explore. I'm going to retry all the old vanilla things, trying all the glitch into the different territories under the terrain and all these things, and then see, like you said, maybe they broke something new they didn't realize they broke, and see what we can find. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. I had a couple more questions here. We kind of covered some of these already. I emailed you about this kind of glitched texture feature that I saw out in the ocean, and you kind of covered that with me already in an email, so we're going to skip that one. But we already talked a little bit about Molten Core, and we discussed about how quickly it was developed from start to finish. And you said, you remind me again, is 6 weeks like a reasonable length of time from start to finish, you think?
Well, it's how long it takes to build. That took about 2 weeks, maybe an extra week waiting for the artists to help me with the lava textures. But it's the scripting and the debugging, because testing Molten Core was so difficult. We didn't have any raid user interface. We didn't have raiders on hand. At the time, we were really worried about having a test server. We were worried about spoilers. That was a big, so we tried to do testing internally, and our internal tests were so awful. You're talking players that don't raid, don't play at high level, don't buff each other, don't wear the right gear. That's your raid group that you're using to test. It was just so bad. Eventually, we got this crack team from the QA department who are always way better than developers when it comes to playing games, because they really know their stuff. Maybe the designers were better than the QA guys, but you certainly don't have 40 game designers laying around with nothing to do the 6 hours or something crazy hours that it takes to legitimately raid test something. So you don't know how long it takes to do something until you can test it, and it's because it was untestable. We literally did not have the manpower to test that internally at Blizzard, because everybody else is working on their tasks. So we debugged it as it went along. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that was broken when it went live. So there was a lot of hot fixes. So it's there's no point when that raid is ever done, but I would say, yeah, a week to script, maybe a couple weeks to debug for the first pass of debugging. And then who knows how long it took to polish stuff after it started getting tested internally. But yeah, I would say about within 6 weeks. I would say maybe shorter than that, actually, probably about 3 or 4 weeks.
I mean, again, not a game developer, but to me, that's still pretty impressive. And I will say, I think the rumors always were kind of the legend, as I would call it, has it that it was developed within a week of WoW's launch or something, that maybe 2 weeks the most. And
sure,
yeah, that's right. Kind of the rumors that run around. So who knows what's true? But I think your insight seems reasonable to me, that maybe we're talking a few weeks longer than 1 week, maybe.
Yeah, well, it depends on what you mean by develop. Like it's there's no hard edge, because you're constantly fixing things, you're always constantly developing. Like you could ask yourself, how long did it take to develop the talents? Talents have been worked on and reiterated a billion times over. So there's no real end to something. And certainly because that was our first long raid, things like interface, things like changes to how people buff and debuff and decurse and depoison one another, all that gets changed like weeks and weeks after the thing goes live. So yeah, I would say those estimates are pretty much accurate.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting hearing about the development of the game, especially, I think you mentioned this earlier, that Onyxia's Lair was going to be like the raid at the launch of WoW. Is that true, that was the only raid originally?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it was only one event. I mean, it's one fight pretty much. So yeah, it wasn't a lot for the shipping game, and Jeff wanted to have a lot. I mean, we wanted to be able to brag that if we had knockback, that was the thing that really got us. Because I don't think Anexia had any. No, it did actually have knockback. I think the tail.
Yep, the tail could knock you back, and I think that was the only knockback in Onyxia's Lair, was just the tail. Yep.
Yeah, Jeff had to beg the producers to get programming time to get knockback, and once we got that, that was probably the thing that he needed to do the Molten Core. So
I mean, knockback's a huge part to the Onyxia fight. And to be honest, I don't know. I would say a high percentage of wipes from Onyxia occurred because someone got tail swiped into the eggs and then hatched a bunch of whelplings and then trained them back to and then healer aggroed them, and then the raid wipes bit from, I vividly remember like the left side, like the tank moving a little bit and Onyxia turning, and then a DPS that was too far to the back, like a rogue, gets hit by the tail and gets thrown back into the eggs on the left side.
Someone's pulling aggro.
Yep, and then the rogue sprints out or vanishes, and then all that threat from the priest's healing aggroes all the whelps, and then the left side of the raid gets wiped out slowly, and the right side of the raid we couldn't see around Onyxia. We can just see maybe the raid icons, the health bar is falling, have no idea what's really going on. Suddenly we go over there and like a tank goes over there to draw aggro away, and it's too late, and at that point the raid leader's calling a wipe and just run back, and someone's yelling at you in Ventrilo about whoever got hit by the tail needs to leave the raid. I mean, that tail swipe is iconic, I think, into the Onyxia fight.
Well, it's also iconic as the deep breath,
Oh,
which
absolutely.
the theories behind it. You know what it was? It was just a random event. That's all
It
it
was
was.
okay,
It
and I
had
think
nothing
eventually,
to do with grouping up. It had nothing to do with proximity to. There's so much voodoo. Like these poor game designers, like they don't want to give spoilers to and actually say, but the voodoo that the players like, they just come up with, just we would just call it voodoo, that there's beliefs on how game systems worked, and it really just didn't work that way. And that was just probably one of the easier examples to point out that the deep breath was just, it was kind of not a good game mechanic, uh, because it was random. I think they reined in the random aspect of it. They made it a little bit more predictable, or at least that they wanted to make sure that the raid that we were looking at the data, and the raids that happened to be deep breathed less often, those were the raids where they would take down Anixia. And the ones that had, unfortunately, the random deep breath, deep breath, deep breath over and over, those were the ones that wiped. Okay, so they didn't like that game mechanic. They didn't like the randomness of it, but um, it had become such a meme with the Raiders that they just kind of like evened out the randomness, rubber banded it back to, 2 or 3 times during a fight.
yeah,
Leave
that
it.
makes sense. I mean, I think I do recall having some rage fits, like the guild having rage fits of just bad luck on deep breaths. And the worst part was we would be zoning in at the same time, like a rival raid guild would zone in. And then we would, we're friends with some of the people over there, and then they would zone out because they had killed Anixia already, and we were on our third wipe because of deep breath or something. And that was the
Yeah.
worst feeling. It was, 11
Oh
o'clock at night,
yeah.
and they're already in bed. It's 9 p.m. They went to bed because they cleared Anixia on one
That
attempt.
is
So
so
frustrating.
awful. Yeah, and then everyone's pointing fingers at over stuff that really isn't even there. That's what's even worse. So, yeah, well, that's the first stuff is always the hardest. That's it's a little hairy sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. So, let's see. So, speaking of kind of early WoW launch, this is something I personally remember, but I can't find the exact evidence of this online. So, if my memory serves, EverQuest 2 launched before WoW by maybe a few weeks to a month, but WoW's open beta was released on the exact same day, or maybe the day before EverQuest 2's launch. Do you remember that? Is that true? And I have to assume it's intentional if it is true.
I think it was true. Uh, on the other side, someone on our company had leaked when we were going to do open beta, and they had, because the logistics behind it were so huge. Like, we were cocky. We had no fear of EverQuest 2, none whatsoever.
Which
Uh,
seems rightfully placed. Now we can
right.
look back, right? So
And frankly, it wasn't even cockiness. We saw their design philosophy, and we knew it to be bad. It was just, there was some, they had embraced uh, really terrible philosophies, mechanics, and we knew they were going to fail. I mean, we didn't even need to play the game. We did play the game, of course, because we're gamers and we want to see what they were doing. Uh, but no, it's, we didn't fear them. We just set the course. It leaked to someone in Sony Online. I remember that it was kind of a really crappy thing that had happened. Um, but I think they did their beta the same day or the day before us. But no, there's so much logistics behind going. Oh, actually, no, I know, no, 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 no. Okay, yeah. See, our beta was, our public alphas were always being delayed with tech stuff, so we actually didn't have control. We were just trying to go live, with either the alpha or the beta or whatever it was, and that stuff was like, well, problem with the servers, we can't go live today. We'll try tomorrow. We'll work on the next day and the next day and the next day. So, um, yeah, we didn't have any control really when we were doing stuff. It was more or less when the bugs let us go live, you know.
What you're saying is that you think that you guys had an open beta, like a date set for release for open beta. That date got to Sony ahead of time, and you think Sony might have adjusted their launch day a little bit to line up with your open beta in a way?
Um, I
I know you're kind of
I
hypothesizing. So
okay, yeah, like I remember that to be true. Like I'm saying, I think that is true,
of course, it's
but
been like
my
14 years,
memory,
so
yeah, my
it's fair.
memory escapes me. But there was something between Sony Online and Blizzard where they adjusted their schedule. To coincide with one of us because one of our team was Blabbermouth, and
Whoops.
we didn't care actually. Who cared was our the owners, Vivendi. Vivendi actually cared, and so that's the only thing that ever mattered is that Vivendi was upset over that. I don't know. They didn't know the gaming space as much as we did. We didn't care. We were just, we had a product that was fun. We were playing it. The marketing people, they cared about stuff like that. We didn't care.
I mean,
And
in my opinion, it seemed like I always assumed, like, as I kind of framed the question, that Blizzard saw the release date of EQ2 coming out, and they said, "Why don't we give people a free trial of WoW in the form of an open beta?" And
absolutely
I mean,
not.
that seemed
Absolutely
okay.
not.
That seemed like I remember at the time my
No,
brother and
we
I were playing, and we thought that was like the most brilliant decision that Blizzard ever
no.
made.
No, we would never do that. And one, that belies a lack of confidence in your product. If you're playing marketing games like that, but let me tell you, that was common in the games industry.
Right. That's what I'm playing it
Yeah.
off of. Yeah.
So when I say that the EverQuest guys, what I mean is their marketing people probably forced their team against the developer's will to release their game early. It's not like the
Okay.
devs were ever like that, or that's some suit decision that unfortunately when you've got publishers that have control over the purse strings, that stuff happens, and Blizzard would never do something like that. No.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know. It clears it up because ever since then my brother and I still talk about it. We're like, do you remember that time that Blizzard just destroyed EverQuest 2 out the gates by releasing the open beta? That's how we always frame it in our head. But I'm happy to hear the other side of the story. That's probably
Yeah.
certainly more accurate than whatever we dreamed up.
Yeah.
Okay, so we just got a couple more questions, or maybe three more. So is there anything, just kind of broadly speaking, that you wish the world or the player base knew about the World of Warcraft or the WoW team in general? Just anything you'd ever wished that you could have said to the player base?
Oh yeah. Well, that's kind of why I wrote the book. The reason why is the player speculation is just so wrong. They see only what the PR department wants them to know. When players, or I'm sorry, devs, when devs go to a GDC or a BlizzCon, they're they're filtered through the PR department so that the devs don't say two different things because you don't want to upset people and appear that you're lying or appear that there's conflicts within the company. People's imaginations run away with things, so we kind of keep that down to a minimum. So like what you guys know about game development is very it's very controlled for a very good reason. So this book, because it's coming from an outside source, even though I am licensed by their company, they can kind of distance themselves from the message. That gives me the room to actually say way, way, way more than you've ever heard about uh, Blizzard Entertainment, about the process. So it's kind of the entire book, like just how messy game development is. It's not as planned as you think. It really isn't. I wish it were. I wish it were that easy, but you know, it, yeah, it's. I guess it's as unplanned as more than
So speaking of game development or the game industry in general, Do you have any advice for? Actually, before I get into this question, you don't currently work in the game industry at all, in the video game industry. Is that correct?
That is correct, and that's another reason why I wrote the book. I didn't want to use the book. Like Blizzard has this, old school Blizzard has this type of credo. You don't take credit for what you do, so that everybody in the company can take credit for the game. You only, and but the problem there's bad things that come around with that. Believe it or not, Blizzard came across as this big black box where no information came out of Blizzard other than a really good game. And so it actually made it very hard to hire people from in the company, or from within the industry, convincing them that, yeah, Blizzard is a really good place to work. And usually all the other companies have all these testimonials of employees going, oh yeah, this company, this company or that company, oh, it's awesome to work here. Blizzard didn't have any of that. We only had Bill Roper. And when it was only one PR guy saying, oh yeah, it's a great place to be here, it's a little bit less credible. So you do have to open up the doors a little bit. So that was all after kind of I had left. There's a lot more, Blizzard's a lot more open with their culture and the doors. But yeah, so I kind of didn't want to write this book and be accused of someone using it to raise their profile, which is often what people do inside of industries. I didn't want to take credit for anybody or be a target for interviews or keynote addresses or stuff like that, because people know my name. Even if I'm giving credit to all the other developers, they have me as a point of contact, as a fellow journalist. So once I'm leaving the industry, I think I wanted to have credibility. I don't work for Blizzard. This book is unlike everything you've ever read, because this is the on the ground experience of what it is, and you don't get that with a lot of GDC talks or anything like that. So it's just the credibility of me not being in the industry. I'm in the board game industry now. I consider myself, even though I guess I'm in the book publishing industry. But no, it's I'm out of the industry. So
Okay. So
yeah.
being out of the industry, do you have any advice for anyone that would want to enter the game industry? If you don't feel comfortable giving
Oh
advice,
no,
that's
totally.
fine. But if
Yeah,
you
I
do,
mean,
I think there's
yeah,
people that are interested.
yeah. I mean, if I kind of wanted to teach at some point until I saw the state of academia for game teaching. There's really no major colleges that seem to be doing it right. There's I mean, I guess I get that impression. It's very hard getting into academia and getting a good picture of what it is. Like they often roll game development into the programming department, and it's really more of an art than it is a science like that. I mean, you have to develop your design muscles, and it's closer to the art field that I feel um, than programming. But yeah, like but what I would say, my advice is polishing is what developers look at. You can get in with one really, really, really polished piece, and that's because when you see someone who does a little bit of everything, it comes across as someone who's kind of bored with working on something. Uh, Showing that you're good at animation is fine. What companies are interested in is someone who can show that they can animate better than 80% of the animators out there, and that takes time, and you have to develop yourself on a level. So bouncing from animation to particle effects, and then going to 3D modeling, and then showing that you can do texture, that's nobody does that. Okay, you usually are a particle effects person. That's a typically hard thing to do. Not a lot of artists want to work on particle effects, so that's one of the harder positions to hire for. So if you really want to get into the industry, that's a good way to do it. And it takes a lot of time to really understand all the tools out there. And only the most passionate people are going to polish their particle effects or whatever it is to a degree that it's up to professional standards. So I would say cut down your portfolio pieces to don't do everything under the sun, you know, because that's what it's all about. It's all about the portfolio.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so I am sort of in academia in research. I work in an
Oh,
academic lab, but I have no
yeah.
experience in, again, game development, especially in the academic setting. But that is kind of a tragedy in a sense that there isn't a more formalized route of education for
Oh,
game development. And
absolutely.
I
Yeah.
mean, you have schools dedicated to films, right? The film industry, the music industry. There's entire,
Yeah.
they're not
Yeah.
necessarily large universities, but there are entire programs devoted to those. And I know very few game ones. I'm thinking of like DigiPen. Is that one of them? DigiPen? It used to be
Yeah,
partnered
that
with Nintendo.
sounds
I think it's in
familiar.
Washington, but that was I haven't heard about it in years, so I don't know if it's still. I only
Right.
knew about it through Nintendo. It used to have some partnership with Nintendo, I think, and I think that partnership has dissolved. But I'm
Yeah.
not familiar with the industry very well, I guess, in that sense.
Yeah, I did some. I have a medical issue with my hands, and so that's kind of what's actually kicked me out of computer games. It's not. I can't do sustained computer use, so I don't play computer games anymore. And that's kind of what kind of made me think, oh, maybe I could teach, what I've learned. And this was before I wrote the book. But after looking, yeah, see, the problem with being a designer, okay, so if you're a designer, uh, you're usually you're dependent on other departments. You're dependent on programming. You're dependent on art. Those are the two big ones. So it's hard to really teach pure computer game development to anybody. That's why it's kind of rolled into the programming department, because at least if you're a programmer, you can use blocky art and at least do your own code, but you're only limited to how good you are as a coder. Yeah, I mean, you could be the best game designer in the world. If you're a really crummy coder, your stuff isn't going to as shine as much as the other people. So that's why I think board games would actually be a better discipline to learn the principles of game design. I actually came out of the country's #1 ranked graphic design program, Kent State, Ohio. At least back when I was in college. This was a long, long, long time ago, but it was a really tough program. 75% dropout rate. It was a boot camp. That's where I got comfortable working 80 plus hours a week. It was like nothing I've done professionally was ever as tough as getting through college. But that type of mentality, though, but like that is design as well, and learning how to teach the principles of design at a very rudimentary level, and then keep adding and adding stuff to them and get people to uh, uh, communicate. That's the other thing that designers, more than anything else, they need to be able to communicate. They need to have a vocabulary about what they're talking about. They have to illustrate their thoughts because they're paid to communicate to programmers and artists and production people. So you have to develop really good communication skills, and that's both with text, writing, graphics, knowing how to use the tools that it takes, whatever they are, to communicate. It could just be a whiteboard, or a whiteboard, uh, but you have to be able to express yourself in these very abstract concepts that computer games are and board games are to other people. So before it's even built. So that's another thing that you have to do as a designer. But yeah, no one's really doing it that way. It's more like usually a grad student wants to work on games, and it's I don't know how disciplined it is. Without an industry background, I can imagine it would be very tough to do, because I came from the first person shooter mod community, and just learning that everything that we were doing was wrong for MMOs. That's like a huge. That's a huge jump. So there's all kinds of games, cell phone games, and it's hard to actually just have a design program by itself that actually applies to everything. So that's why I would start with simple stuff like board games.
Okay, well, thank you. That's as far I have again no experience in this, but I think that will probably be very helpful to people, especially people that are a bit younger that maybe don't really know exactly what they want to do, but have some free time and are interested in games. It might give them an opportunity to think about, maybe develop the idea of a board game and think about the philosophies of game design, what you want the players to experience, what you want, from start to finish, what a game should feel like in some capacity. So I think that's a good starting point as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
Great. I realized I missed a question, and I'm going to go back a couple here on my list. So there have been some versions of Alpha WoW that have leaked on the internet. And one of those, I believe, is 0.5.3. That's the earliest build that I know of anyway that has leaked. Do you know if any earlier builds even exist anywhere anymore? Like if someone at Blizzard has them, if Blizzard's vault has them deep buried away, or is that maybe the earliest build that's still around?
No, they save builds. There's a whole list. Like what they have is the daily build. Like every day, the server, some configuration file just takes what's there, compiles it into a separate package. It gets a new build number, and it puts it in a self-contained folder. And if you want to play the daily build, you can drag it onto your hard drive and launch it. So there are probably by now, well, if we're talking vanilla WoW, there's probably hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of copies of vanilla WoW. So yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. But we don't know if those run with today's video cards and today's processors. It's pretty hairy getting some of that stuff to run. It usually takes a programmer to actually debug some stuff, and you really got to ask yourself, how bad do you want it?
I promise you that there are probably thousands of people that have the skills to do that. That if such black boxes leaked onto the internet, and I'm not asking you to do this, obviously. I think both of us would be in very big legal trouble if we conspired for this. But if for example someone did that, I promise you there are many people that have the skills and the time to.
Oh, I totally believe it. Yeah, I mean, you get a daily build leaked onto the internet. Yeah, they can data mine it. Like,
absolutely.
Cows come from. Yeah, but it's just that stuff is really secure. Like what I was saying, that if Blizzard actually wanted to run one of their pre-alpha builds, it would take considerable internal work to get it to run. That would be my guess. That would be my guess. Yeah, I'm not even talking about the exterior, the public. I'm talking about if Blizzard. That's why I think classic WoW servers is a huge thing to do. It's making an MMO. You cannot underestimate how much work it is. You really can't.
Yeah. I was going to ask you a question about that. I forgot to put on my list here. Do you have any insight onto, well, just in general, I guess, so it is kind of on this list. Do you have any thoughts about Classic WoW's upcoming release or the development process, or just really as much as you want to talk about Classic WoW, I would love to hear about it.
Yeah, I think I'm actually surprised Blizzard, even though there's so much. Oh, let's see. They have to shut down servers that are running competitive versions of WoW. Like for legal reasons, they have to do that. That's either that or because if they allow that, then it's a smaller jump to start charging people money.
Is that like an intellectual property kind of protection sort of thing?
Yes, they have to do that. Like, and frankly, because once you allow somebody to do it, then those people, there's an implied permission. Then they start applying for ownership. They start registering stuff. I mean, there's no gray area. You either allow it or you don't. And to actually turn the blind eye to that is giving permission to it, and that just opens up a Pandora's box. So Blizzard was forced by the laws of the land to actually close the vanilla WoW servers down, and making the announcement, and I know everyone's going to hate me when I say this, J. Allen Brack, it was a famous quote of him saying, "You think you want vanilla WoW, but you actually really
Right.
don't."
Yes. Very famous. Yes.
He's, I don't have any dog in this fight. He's right. He's 100% right. It's a huge, huge project to do that. One, just staffing, finding developers willing to walk through other developers' footsteps all along the way, holding back all of their own creative impulses, their natural creative impulses, that's just hiring is a nightmare. It's just because people don't like, I wouldn't build levels, it's not for, I wouldn't do it for, it's for self gratification. People don't get in this industry for the money. It's not just a question of money, because you can't throw these guys just tons of cash, because then the guys working on all the other projects are going, hey, what is this? What are we, chopped liver over here? I mean, you're paying those guys. So it's a can of worms, just staffing a project like that. And I don't know how they actually solve all of the design problems. Like, how long do you really want these servers to endure? How long are we going to play Onyxia and the Molten Core as a raid? Is that something that we do for 2 years? Are we going to be in the Molten Core really raiding for 2 years? And 2 years isn't nothing in an MMO. You have to justify it. You got to start talking about 5 to 10 years. And so then what do you do? Do you go to the Burning Crusades? Do you make unique content? And like, whatever you do uniquely in these classic servers, you can't make your other servers jealous of, so it is such a messy proposition. I'm very surprised Blizzard actually publicly said, yeah, we're going to throw some weight behind it. Usually what they'll do is they'll throw resources to it to make sure that they can actually deliver. Okay. And maybe they've done that. Maybe that's, I don't know. I don't talk to anybody about internal Blizzard affairs, but I've heard a couple things through the grapevine that if Blizzard wants to make that, but I can't verify it, so I'm not actually going to say that. The one or two things that I've heard from
oh man,
someone,
what a tease.
yeah, well, with someone, but I don't even know if it's accurate. It's not even much of a tease. That's, somebody asked me, how do you keep secrets in the company? And it's like, well, when the company says something, then it's no longer a secret, because there's so many rumors. There's a white noise out there of just rumors behind Blizzard. Like, if I had something that, okay, classic servers are going to be like this, okay, it doesn't mean anything because Blizzard hasn't concurred with that. So, there's nothing really I could give you that you would be satisfied with until Blizzard, agrees that yes, that's the way it's, that's actually the issue here. So no, I can't really actually say anything, because I really don't know anything.
That's totally fair. I think Blizzard's plan, they did say they're using patch 1.12 as sort of the base for the game, but that doesn't necessarily, I don't think they specified if they're using 1.12 talents and itemization or they never really went into detail, right? So they said that's kind of the base to some extent, at least for their internal build right now. Otherwise, we also know that I believe they want to move it to the modern infrastructure. I think it's going to probably have BattleNet integration, and I think they want it running maybe on the modern WoW client so that they're not juggling two clients at the same time, but I don't know if that's exactly true or what that entails.
Oh my God, that sounds so hard to do. This is so not an easy project. I can't even stress it enough. I just can't even stress it enough. This sounds so hard to do. But again, I haven't worked there since 2011, so who knows? This is an industry that it moves and it improves. It's probably a lot faster than what I remember, but I wouldn't hold my breath until Blizzard actually shows people playing. If there aren't rumors of people playing internally, I would say a while before that actually comes out. But well, I could be wrong, you know.
Okay, yeah. I was thinking of asking you what if you had to give an estimate how long it would take, but honestly, I think that would depend on how much resources Blizzard is devoting to. If they have a 5-man team or a 50-man team, is a huge difference, right? So there's no way you could, I assume, predict anything.
It would start, I would guess, with a 50-man team, without a doubt, and it would be work that nobody would want to do. So there's a whole bunch of resistance internally with that. This would be a slow boat to China. I can't imagine what it would happen. I can't imagine it would happen within 2 years.
Okay, so you think from maybe the announcement, at least 2 years after that, before we would see it?
Minimum. I mean, it would take a year to test. They gotta make sure everything, because they're learning about a new longevity. This isn't like the current WoW that can just change. Like I don't know how they would do it. I really don't. But I think it would take a lot longer than people commonly think.
I know some of the estimates. They announced it at BlizzCon in 2017, so kind of near the end of last year. And some people were speculating, just fans or whatever, were speculating it would launch by this year already. Because people were saying, well, there are, as you said, these other servers, vanilla servers that are available online. And if those people could do it, why can't Blizzard release, just take that client and just release it? And I think even from then I knew that was overly simplifying the problem. My personal estimate was always about a year and a half. So I always said like spring 2019, which sounds like maybe that is still even a little significantly optimistic, really.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about apples and oranges. You're talking about an unsupported project to one that's charging money. Blizzard isn't going to do this for free. They could never get permission from Vivendi to support or back financially a project that they're just. I mean, they can't do it for free. I mean, it would compete with the project that's actually making money, World of Warcraft, Legion, and Battle for Azeroth. Yeah, they have to support it. Oh my gosh, it boggles my mind. And I've interviewed. I know every aspect of how making World of Warcraft. I've interviewed every department on the team, CEO Alan Adham, the guy who founded Blizzard, all the way down to just the guys who translated the text. It's an enormous undertaking. It's enormous.
Okay, well, thanks. I think that's it for the questions I had, and I think regarding Classic WoW, personally, I expect I will probably spend a little more time playing that when it launches than Modern WoW. I mean, it depends where I'm at in life, and where Modern WoW is. That could be years from now, but
wait for the reviews.
right. But I'm optimistic. I think Blizzard has a good track record, of very high quality products.
If gun to my head, if I had to predict, it's going to get killed internally.
You think so?
If I had to. But if they, first of all, they won't release something bad. Okay, that would be another gun to the head. Like they will release something, but it's something that I can't imagine, like sustaining that for a long time. I don't know. There are also really, really smart people working at that company. So if I were in charge, that's what I would do. But I'm not in charge, obviously. So that's, prepare yourself for that possibility. That might be the very best thing for everyone.
Do you think if
releasing a bad product would be worse than killing it internally? So,
I think I'll agree with that one. I think if it's going to be, some like I don't know, destroyed version of vanilla WoW and doesn't play well and they modify too many things, I think most people would be pretty upset with that. And I think you're right. Would rather just not see it at all, perhaps.
And frankly, you're splitting your player base. Like there's going to be guild drama when a classic World of Warcraft comes out. Think about just the guild drama by itself. when you rip the roots out of especially all the old guilds, that costs, and if you have people quitting the game over that, then that doesn't make a lot of business sense. So yeah, it's hairy.
Do you think? I mean, does Blizzard do some sort of have like an accounting team that does some sort of like cost budget
Oh yeah.
analysis, and they
Oh,
decide cost
absolutely.
benefit analysis and decide. So,
Absolutely.
so you think they must have came to some internal conclusion saying, okay, launching vanilla WoW as a classic WoW re-release is either financially beneficial to us, or the goodwill from it plus some financial maybe a small financial loss plus a lot of goodwill. Is that worth it, or does it have to be a
Uh,
financially beneficial thing?
well, they do have cost benefit analysis. Here's the things: those guys don't make decisions at all. What those guys do is they pass off whatever data they get. Probably be pretty sketchy guesswork at best, and they pass that on to the developers. Okay, and they say whether or not there's indications that there's a market. We didn't think we would sell 500,000 copies of World of Warcraft um, nationally when we launched. We never dreamt it would be a million players in North America, and I think it's, I don't know what the numbers are now. I don't think anybody does, but yeah. So there's that's a very unreliable thing. You got to be very careful when you listen to that type of data.
Okay,
Um,
okay.
but those guys are so not making the decisions. It's going to be whether or not the game designers are confident that they can make a vanilla or classic WoW fun. That will be uh, and unfortunately, a whole lot of money might be spent before they actually discover whether or not those predictions are right or wrong. They could build the entire thing and go through the years and the tens of millions of dollars that it takes, and then realize, boy, this just isn't working. You know, this is not something we can sustain. Um, or they'll maybe discover that it negatively impacts, like I said, the WoW that's out there now. You don't want to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. So just off the top of my head, I can think of just how hard it's going to be. So, um, and it's not my job to do that.
Right, right, of course.
Yeah,
You
it's
know,
there's many people their job to do that. I'm sure they've come up with a million other reasons why not to do it. So we'll see.
you think that, as you said, gun to your head, you would expect that they might end up canceling the project. Do you think if they cancel it, is it safe to assume that's going to be kind of a quiet cancellation, like the Warcraft Adventures, Lord of the Clans game, or StarCraft Ghost, where it's sort of, or Titan, for example, where you don't really hear anything about it for months and months and years, and then eventually they say, well, yeah, we killed the project. Is that kind of how you would see it go?
No, like what the reason why those you don't just like it's kind of funny. You don't just cancel one doesn't simply just cancel the project. What you're doing is you're ramping down the resources that you put into that project. Maybe you can keep a skeleton crew of programmers and designers on board to see if they can actually fix the pain points. Then, if they are fixed, then you can ramp up and put artists and level designers on something. So, yeah, when they quotes cancel something, it's usually on life support. It's a big movement. You can't just flop 100 so developers onto a new project. It's just it doesn't work that way. You want it to first of all, you want to treat those developers with a lot of respect and make sure that they lined up in places that they want to be. And that's an HR, that's a nightmare, because you got to find out all the teams. Do you want developers? Can you actually take people? So it takes time to place people. It's we're talking big numbers here. So yeah, if they were real callous, they would just cancel it. That's like a lot of console games are like that. They just throw a couple hundred texture artists at a project, and that's not how Blizzard works. They want to they want to treat their people respectfully and not you know be so traumatic when you cancel a project. So yeah, no, they'll make an announcement, and they'll give you reasons why they canceled it. But they want to collect everybody's thoughts and get the message straight. By then, it takes so much time to do that yeah, it's kind of like after the fact. But no, they'll want to tell you as soon as they can that. But what they want to do is make sure that what they're telling you is 100% right, and it takes time to really vet those messages. I mean, um, you know, there's a lot of conflicting opinions inside of every development team, let alone, I mean, every department's going to have conflicting opinions when something like that happens. So that's my prediction, tinfoil hat theory.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's good to get, as a fan of the game, or as fans of the game, the community, not a lot of us are necessarily game developers. We have our own jobs, but we're not experts on game development. And, we can watch, religiously watch the job postings on Blizzard's website. And people do that. People watch it.
Oh, I believe it, yeah.
We make predictions based on what we see. Like, oh, Blizzard has filled all the positions. The team is assembled. And then another one opens. And you'll see people say, uh-oh, that means they couldn't even find someone, or someone quit already.
I know.
It doesn't mean that. It means maybe the team is now expanding because they're at the next stage, right?
Yeah.
So it's very funny to me seeing, because everyone's so excited, right? Any Blizzard game, anything that Blizzard makes, people get hyped about.
Sure.
And even if it's a kind of a re-release of an old game in the form of classic WoW, we're all super hyped for it. So we're just, begging Blizzard for any news at all. They released a dev water cooler, maybe, like a 2-page kind of post a month or so ago, and that was just meticulously analyzed by 100 YouTubers and a forum post and everyone. We all said the same things, right? I mean, there's only so many ways you can analyze, 6 paragraphs of news, but it's just everyone's, I would say desperate, as if we really are desperate. We're just so excited for it. So it's really nice to hear a WoW developer, a former WoW developer's insight onto how this can work. It's very helpful to us.
Yeah, it's and honestly, one thing about my book is that you see how freaking hard it is to make an MMO. Like, it's hard to make a computer game. Okay, it's really hard to make a computer game, and actually good enough that it sustains, supports its own weight. But to do an MMO, it's that much harder. And I go into reasons why it's so hard, but I think that reading this book there's a lot more sympathy for the Blizzard decisions for the future. Hopefully, that's honestly one of the things that I say. If you can educate your audience to really giving them more pieces of what we had to work with back in the 2000s, they could probably be a little bit more sympathetic and understanding to decisions like if they have to kill, classic WoW or this project or that project. They can understand that, wow, there's a lot more balls in the air than we realize, hearing stuff from, the PR departments or the press releases or the water cooler things. It's a lot more complicated, because they're not going to give you all the little details that really are the make or break things for the game. You'll get a very general type of I compare this book to, if you ask a general, how goes the war? Okay, how does the general on CNN, how is he going to answer that question? It's going to be short. It's going to be very general. We had some obstacles, but we overcame them, and we're pressing forward. It's very, and that's how companies usually talked to their customer base. And, Blizzard tries to, communicate as well as they can, but it's a big company and there's a lot of conflicting opinions going on. So this book is kind of asking, if you're asking a patrolman from a forward outpost, how goes the war? How is that guy going to answer? He's going to tell you his personal feelings. It's going to be a long-winded answer. There's going to be a lot of anecdotes and jokes and just embarrassing situations. And it's going to be a lot more human answer than how the corporate type of answer is going to be. And that's kind of what I think encompasses the tone of what I'm saying versus to how a company like Blizzard or Apple or Microsoft or Google, any company communicates to their customer base. And me being independent, it gives me the wherewithal to have anecdotes and personal opinions and editorials that other companies can't do. So.
Yeah, and the sample that I read, I would say that's exactly your description is exactly how I felt about it. I think it's a much more personal feeling than what I think of when I see, a press release from Blizzard, right? Or even a BlizzCon event. That they maybe don't rehearse exactly, but they certainly go over talking points.
No. They rehearse it. It's rehearsed. They have to. They absolutely have to. It's not because the corporate guys are coming down or the suits are coming down. It's because they want to make sure that something doesn't conflict with something else that's being said. Because like you guys watch the job postings, people, they get their little theories and their conspiracy. They get their Kabbalahs, and just not feeding the monster is so important. It is so important. You can't even imagine, because people care about these games, and we care about we care about these games, or I should say I did care about when I was with Blizzard. It was important to us. It was important to all the developers, just for the internal morale of the team. You want to make sure that the customers are not unhappy. Even though it doesn't affect your lunch, it doesn't affect anything in your day-to-day existence. People care about their product, and they care about the customers, and Blizzard really cares about their customers. So that's why they do it. That's why that's why their hands are kind of tied when they're talking to people. Let's put it that way.
That makes sense to me. And I get that. It's not that they are hiding things. I mean, they certainly are hiding stuff because they don't want to disclose it yet, because it's not necessarily finalized.
Correct.
But, right. But they want to make sure that it's not more confusing. It doesn't want to be confusing, first of all, to people, or conflicting. Because then, like you said, very quickly, conspiracy theories will pop up about, J. Allen Brock said this, and Metzen said that, and they conflict. So are they fighting? Do they hate each other? It quickly devolved into all sorts of funny things, right? So I can see that. That's very reasonable to me. Yeah. Okay, so, that's everything I had as far as questions, John. I really appreciate your time. I wanted to ask, is there any last thing you would like people to know, or anything you want to say or talk about? I know your book is coming out hopefully by the end of this year, I think, is what your timeline is.
No, we're talking August 28th.
For the book's release. Or is that for the book or the Kickstarter?
The Kickstarter. Yeah.
The Kickstarter is coming out August 28th. Okay.
Yeah, the book will be going to Amazon after we get it printed. I'm guessing November. I don't want to promise, Christmas, but who knows? There's a lot of balls in the air. Of course. I'm a one-man operation, so I'm learning as I go. So
the Kickstarter starts on August 28th, 2018, of course, and the book you're hoping to have on Amazon in November. Is that a physical copy or digital, like ebook?
It'll be both. I have permission for PDFs, ebooks, and printed hardbound. And we'll see. That's when I'm delivering the Kickstarter rewards. Hopefully, I'm going to try, but that's going to be, the printer, their schedules and stuff like that. So,
of course. Okay.
I want the Amazon copies. I'm not going to deliver to Amazon before the Kickstarter people get theirs.
That seems
I'm
reasonable.
not making that mistake, because I've talked to other Kickstarter guys, and they say, "Oh yeah, we actually did that once. It was a huge problem." So no, my Kickstarter guys, they get it first without a doubt.
Okay, I think that's a good decision. I can promise you people will be very upset very quickly if they find the book is available on Amazon and their, special edition or whatever they got on Kickstarter is not in their hands.
Well, they'll get a 20% discount from the Amazon price at least. So,
okay, that's a good incentive for sure. Okay, and then what's the title of your book? Do you have the official title? Is it?
Yeah, I keep calling it's the WoW Diary. The WoW Diary or the World of Warcraft Diary. I seem to be vacillating between the two. I designed it so that it doesn't look like a Blizzard book. It actually looks like a textbook, and a lot of people have made that comment. And I'm like, yeah, that's by design. That's we're trying not to. I don't want to be a spokesperson for Blizzard. I don't want this to be canon. This is one person's, story, like one blind man feeling a very big elephant. So that's kind of the take on that. But yeah, August 28th, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time is when we launched the Kickstarter, and
Okay, that's awesome. I mean, I really enjoyed what I read of the book, and I will be picking up the Kickstarter whenever when it goes live. I spoke to a few of the people that I think are doing interviews with you, and they seem to all be giving a lot of praise to the book when we were talking about it. So I think a lot of people are going to really enjoy it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. And so whenitsready.com is your website. That'll be in the video description here. And I'll probably put the link of the Kickstarter directly once that goes live. I think this video will go up before the Kickstarter goes live, but I'll include it in there so people can get to it easier. But otherwise, that's everything I had for you, John. So thank you again for your time. I think I told you it would be 30 to 60 minutes in the upper end.
And I told you it's going to be longer.
We're about 2.5 hours in now. So I think, I'll probably edit down a little bit, but that's pretty much everything you said is going into it. So we got about a 2.5 hour thing going here. So I'll let you go at this point. But thank you again for all your time.
Very good. Thank you, Supa. It was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.